The spring of 1815 descended upon London with all the grandeur and expectation that marked the beginning of the season. Mayfair blazed with lamplight and ambition. Ballrooms overflowed with eligible young ladies dressed in their finest silks, and drawing rooms hummed with the eternal currency of high society, gossip, matrimony, and scandal. Among the glittering constellation of debutantes and established beauties, one name rose above all others with the inevitability of dawn: Miss Kate Shepherd, the diamond of the season. As we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now let's continue in the story. At 22, Kate occupied that most coveted of positions in society, a woman of sufficient maturity to be trusted with a household, yet young enough to be considered a triumph for any gentleman fortunate enough to secure her hand. But Kate's path to this elevated status had been neither simple nor assured. 6 years earlier, at the tender age of 16, her world had shattered when her father, a respected gentleman of modest means, took his own life following a devastating financial scandal. The whispers had been merciless: embezzlement, gambling debts, disgrace. Kate had been left with nothing: no fortune, no family, no prospects, and a name so thoroughly tarnished that even distant relatives had closed their doors to her. She should have disappeared into obscurity, become a governess or companion if she was fortunate, slipped into poverty if she was not. Instead, she had been saved by one of England's most powerful men, Duke Bradley Davison, the Duke of Davison, who had been a distant acquaintance of her father's and who, upon hearing of her circumstances, had done something both extraordinarily generous and deeply unusual. He had made her his ward. Under Bradley's guardianship, Kate had been given what should have been impossible: education, refinement, position, and most importantly, respectability. The Duke's unimpeachable reputation had gradually washed away the stain of her father's scandal. His wealth had provided her with gowns, masters, and access to the highest circles of society. His name had opened doors that should have remained forever closed to the orphaned daughter of a suicide. The transformation had been remarkable. Kate's beauty, which might have gone unnoticed in a governess's modest dress, now shone with full brilliance in the elegant gowns the Duke's household provided. Her auburn hair, rich with golden highlights, was dressed each evening in elaborate coils that framed her face like a Renaissance portrait. Her eyes, pale blue-gray, clear and intelligent, seemed to hold both warmth and a carefully cultivated composure. Her features were delicate yet striking: high cheekbones, a graceful neck, lips that curved naturally into a smile that gentlemen found utterly disarming. But it was not merely beauty that made Kate the diamond. It was the way she carried herself, the perfect deportment learned from the finest instructors, the fluency in French and Italian that allowed her to charm foreign dignitaries, the accomplished piano playing that drew appreciative audiences at musicales, and most of all, the quality of her conversation. Kate could discuss literature with scholars, politics with parliamentarians, and estate management with landowners, all while maintaining the modest demeanor expected of an unmarried lady. She was, in every conceivable way, the perfect lady, and she was very much expected to make a brilliant match. For nearly 2 months, that match had seemed all but assured. Lord William Ashford, the Marquis of Ashford, had been courting Kate with the kind of determined, respectful attention that mothers dreamed of for their daughters. William was everything propriety demanded in a husband: handsome in an unassuming way, possessed of a considerable estate in Derbyshire, unfailingly courteous, and utterly respectable. There had never been a hint of scandal attached to his name. He attended every social function where Kate appeared, brought her flowers from his conservatory, engaged her in thoughtful conversation, and made his intentions perfectly clear to both Kate and her guardian. The Duke had given his formal approval to the courtship. Society had already begun to speak of the match as inevitable. Kate's companion, Mrs. Eleanor Marsh, a kind widow who served as her chaperone, had declared Lord Ashford a most fortunate attachment. Even Kate herself acknowledged that William possessed every quality a sensible woman should desire in a husband. They would have a comfortable marriage, she told herself: respectful companionship, children, a well-managed household. security, affection, if not passion. You have been given a second chance that few in your circumstances could ever dream of, Mrs. Marsh had told her gently one evening. Lord Ashford is offering you not just marriage, but the restoration of everything you lost. You will be a marchioness. Your children will never know want or shame. What more could any woman wish for? Kate had smiled and agreed because that was what grateful wards did. And truly, what more could she wish for? William was kind. He would treat her well. The Duke approved. It was exactly the sort of advantageous match her guardian had raised her to make. It was perfect. Entirely perfect. Except that late at night when the house was silent and the London fog pressed against her window like a living thing, Kate would lie awake and press her hand to her chest, feeling for the rapid beating of her heart, and wonder why it felt so strangely dormant, as though it were waiting for something or someone. You're being foolish, she would whisper to herself in the darkness. Lord Ashford is everything you should want. The Duke has been more generous than you deserved. You should be grateful. And she was grateful. She was. It was the third week of April when everything changed. Kate was in the music room, practicing a new piece for an upcoming musicale, when Mrs. Marsh entered with an expression Kate had learned to recognize, carefully controlled excitement. My dear, Mrs. Marsh said, her hands clasped together, I've just received word from His Grace's secretary. The Duke is returning to London. Kate's fingers froze above the keys. Returning from Scotland? Yes. He arrives tomorrow evening and will be in residence for the remainder of the season. He wishes to observe your progress, I believe, and to properly meet Lord Ashford before any betrothal is formally announced. Kate felt something twist in her chest, something that felt dangerously like anticipation mixed with dread. I see, she managed. That is welcome news, of course. Mrs. Marsh studied her carefully. You haven't seen His Grace in 3 years, Kate, not since he left for his Scottish estates. 3 years. Kate remembered that departure with painful clarity. She had been 19, just beginning her own first season, still grieving her father, still so grateful to the Duke for saving her that she could barely meet his eyes without tears threatening. And then he had announced he was leaving London indefinitely to personally manage some crisis with his northern estates. The goodbye had been brief, formal, appropriate. Yet Kate had cried herself to sleep that night, and even now she couldn't fully explain why. I'm certain His Grace will be pleased with how well you've settled, Mrs. Marsh continued. You've become everything he hoped you would be. Yes, Kate said softly, everything he hoped. That night she could not sleep. She told herself it was nerves about presenting Lord Ashford to her guardian. It was important that Bradley approve of the match after all. Everything she was, everything she had came from his generosity. His opinion mattered more than anyone's. But that wasn't what kept her awake. What kept her awake was a memory she had been trying to suppress for 3 years. The last time she had seen Duke Bradley Davison, standing in the entrance hall of his townhouse, ready to depart for Scotland. The way he had looked at her for just a moment, his dark eyes holding something that looked almost like, but no. She had been 19 and foolish, imagining things that couldn't possibly exist. Guardians did not look at their wards that way, and wards did not lie awake at night thinking about their guardian's return with hearts that beat too fast and hands that trembled for no rational reason. Kate rose from her bed and went to the window, looking out at the dark London streets below. Somewhere in this vast city, Bradley Davison would arrive tomorrow, and somehow Kate knew with a certainty that frightened her that when she saw him again, nothing would ever be the same. The next evening, Kate dressed with unusual care for the opening ball of the season at Almack's Assembly Rooms. She chose a gown of midnight blue silk that made her eyes appear almost luminous and allowed her maid to dress her hair in an elaborate style that showcased her neck and shoulders. She told herself she was dressing for Lord Ashford, who would be in attendance. She told herself the Duke might not even come to Almack's on his first night back in London. She told herself many lies that evening. The ballrooms of Almack's blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, and Kate stood at the center of it all, Lord Ashford's hand resting lightly on her waist as they moved through a waltz. Other gentlemen waited for their turn to dance with the diamond. Matrons watched approvingly. Everything was as it should be. Then Kate felt it, a shift in the air, a charge of electricity that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. She turned her head toward the entrance. And there, standing in the shadows at the edge of the ballroom, dressed in severe black that made him look like a figure stepped from a Gothic novel, was Duke Bradley Davison. He was watching her, and the expression on his face, hungry, tortured, barely controlled, would have scandalized every person in that glittering room if they had seen it, but they didn't see it. Only Kate saw it. And in that moment, as their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, Kate Shepherd, the diamond of the season, the perfect ward, the almost betrothed to a marquis, felt something inside her chest crack open like ice in spring. The Duke had returned, and nothing would ever be perfect again. What happens when duty collides with desire? When the man who saved you becomes the man you cannot have? Subscribe now to discover the forbidden love that will either redeem them both or destroy everything they hold dear. Bradley Davison had convinced himself that 3 years would be sufficient. 3 years of managing Scottish estates, of cold northern winds, of distance measured not in miles but in deliberate forgetting. He had left London when Kate was 19, still the grieving, fragile girl whose gratitude had wounded him more than her tears ever could. He had told himself that what he felt was merely the protective affection of a guardian, that the warmth that blooded his chest when she smiled would fade with time and absence, that he was not the kind of man who could fall in love with a ward barely past childhood. He had been wrong about everything. The moment Bradley stepped into Almac's assembly rooms, his carefully constructed defenses shattered like crystal dropped on marble. There, moving through a waltz with Lord Ashford's hand at her waist, was Kate, but not the Kate he had left behind. This Kate was devastatingly, impossibly beautiful, her midnight blue gown catching the candlelight, her auburn hair gleaming like burnished copper, her movements fluid with a confidence that spoke of a woman who knew her own power. When she laughed at something Ashford said, the sound carried across the ballroom, and Bradley felt it like a physical blow. This was not protection he felt. This was desire, raw and undeniable. He forced himself to remain in the shadows, watching as she finished the waltz, as other gentlemen claimed their turns. Each touch of another man's hand on her gloved fingers felt like a knife between his ribs. He counted her smiles, 7 in the span of 20 minutes, and hated every man who earned them. Then her eyes found his across the crowded room. Bradley watched recognition bloom in her face, shock, then joy so unguarded it made his throat tighten, then something else, something that looked dangerously like the same longing he felt. He saw her excuse herself from her partner, saw her moving toward him through the crowd, and knew he could not, would not allow her to see what he was feeling. When Kate reached him, slightly breathless, her eyes bright, Bradley bowed with perfect formality. "Miss Shepherd, you look well." The light in her face dimmed slightly. "Your Grace, we did not expect you this evening. Mrs. Marsh said you had only just arrived." "I felt it my duty to observe your progress." His voice came out colder than he intended. "Lord Ashford seems attentive. He is very kind." Kate's hands twisted together, a gesture he remembered from when she was younger and uncertain. "I had hoped. That is, I'm glad you've returned. I've missed. I trust you have been diligent in your studies," Bradley interrupted, unable to bear whatever she had been about to say. "We shall speak tomorrow regarding your prospects. For now, I believe Lord Ashford is waiting to claim another dance." He bowed again and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of Almac's ballroom, confusion and hurt written across her features. Hours later, in his study with a glass of whiskey that had long since grown warm in his hand, Bradley stared into the dying fire and admitted the truth he had been running from for 3 years. He had left London to escape her. But she had come with him anyway, in every dream, every quiet moment, every breath. And now she stood before him, no longer a memory, but a woman of flesh and fire, and Bradley knew he was lost. The invitation to Lord Pembroke's country estate in Surrey arrived like a reprieve. A week away from London's scrutiny, from the endless parade of balls and social obligations, Bradley told himself the change of scenery would provide relief. He was wrong. The country stripped away the formal armor of London society. Ladies wore simpler gowns, gentlemen shed their rigid formality, and the expansive gardens invited long, unchaperoned walks. Kate took full advantage. She appeared at breakfast in a muslin dress that made her look younger, softer, and suggested afternoon walks with an innocence that fooled no one, least of all Bradley. They fell into a dangerous rhythm. Walking the estate's gardens, they discussed literature, politics, estate management, everything except the tension that hummed between them like a plucked string. Bradley found himself relaxing despite his better judgment, laughing at Kate's sharp observations about their fellow guests, forgetting momentarily that she was his ward and not simply the most captivating woman he had ever known. On the third day, Kate managed to slip away from Mrs. Marsh during their afternoon constitutional. Bradley found himself alone with her on a path leading toward an ornamental folly, propriety demanding he turn back, and so desire propelling him forward. "You did that deliberately," he said. "Did what?" Kate's expression was all innocence, but her eyes held challenge. "Lost your chaperone." Mrs. Marsh's knees troubled her. "I merely suggested she rest." Kate moved deeper into the garden, forcing Bradley to follow. "Surely my guardian is adequate protection." The sky had been threatening all afternoon, and the storm arrived with sudden violence. Rain came in sheets, soaking them within seconds. They ran for the folly, laughing breathlessly, and suddenly they were sheltering in the small classical structure. Water streaming from their clothes, utterly alone. Kate's hair had come loose from its pins, falling in wet copper waves around her shoulders. Her dress clung to her in ways that made Bradley's mouth go dry. She was laughing, pushing wet strands from her face, and she had never been more beautiful. "Kate," he began, his control fracturing, "why did you leave?" The laughter died in her eyes. 3 years ago. Don't tell me it was a state business. Tell me the truth." "I can't. Because I was young? Because I was grieving?" Kate moved closer, rain still dripping from her eyelashes. "I'm not that girl anymore." "I know," Bradley said, the words torn from somewhere deep. "God help me, I know." "Then why?" "Because you're my ward." His voice was raw. "Because I have a duty to protect you. And what I feel, He stopped himself, horror at what he'd almost admitted washing over him. "What you feel, Kate pressed, her hand reaching for his. "Tell me." "Stop." Bradley caught her hand, holding it when he should have released it. "Stop pushing this. Stop pretending you do not feel this," Kate said, her voice shaking with rain or emotion or both. Bradley looked at her, water streaming down his face, drowning in those gray-blue eyes. "I have to." Voices called from the main path, their fellow guests searching for the moment shattered. But as they emerged from the folly, both knew something fundamental had shifted. The truth was too close to the surface now, and neither could pretend much longer. They returned to London on a Thursday. By Saturday night, Kate could no longer bear the silence. She found Bradley in his study well past midnight, a half-empty decanter of whiskey beside him, still dressed in his evening clothes from a dinner they had both endured in excruciating politeness. He looked up when she entered, exhaustion and something darker written across his features. "Kate, it's late. You shouldn't be here." "I'm tired of being told what I should and shouldn't do." She closed the door behind her, propriety be damned. "I'm tired of watching you push me toward Lord Ashford while you look at me like—" Her voice broke. "Why do you do this?" "Lord Ashford is an excellent match." "That's not what I asked." Kate moved closer, her hands trembling. "I asked why you look at me the way you do, then turn away. Why you touched my neck that night and your hands shook. Why you ran to Scotland 3 years ago." "Kate." "The truth, Bradley, please. Just once, give me the truth." His name on her lips undid something in him. Bradley stood, running a hand through his hair, his control visibly fracturing. "You want the truth? Very well. I left because I couldn't trust myself around you anymore. I came back believing 3 years would have cured me. Instead, I find myself in agony watching another man court you, knowing I have no right to feel anything but a guardian's appropriate concern." Kate's breath caught. "Then you do feel—" "It doesn't matter what I feel." Bradley's voice rose anguished. "Don't you understand? I'm your guardian. I hold complete legal power over your life. Your future, any feeling I have for you is a violation of that trust. Society would call it grooming, manipulation. They would destroy you for it, Kate. They would say you had no choice, that I exploited your dependence. But I do have a choice, Kate said fiercely, closing the distance between them. I'm not confused. I'm not mistaking gratitude for something else. I know my own heart. Bradley, I love you. I have loved you for... No, the word came out harsh, desperate. You think you do, but you're mistaking dependence for love. I saved you when you were 16 and vulnerable. You're grateful, attached, but it's not love, Kate. It can't be. The words hit her like a physical blow. Kate stepped back, her face draining of color. You think I don't know my own heart? You think I'm a child playing at emotions I don't understand? I think you're too young to distinguish between what you feel and what you think you should feel toward the man who controls your entire existence. Then you're a coward, Kate whispered, tears streaming down her face, hiding behind honor and duty because you're too afraid to admit the truth. She turned toward the door, and Bradley let her go, though everything in him screamed to call her back. I love you, Kate had said, the words hanging in the air like an accusation, and Bradley, the honorable Duke, responded with the only lie that mattered. No, you do not. Lord Ashford proposed on a Tuesday afternoon in the drawing room, with Mrs. Marsh present as propriety demanded. He spoke of devotion, partnership, and the life they would build together. His words were sincere, his affection genuine. When he presented the ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to his grandmother, his hands trembled slightly with hope. Kate looked at the ring and thought about Bradley's study 3 nights prior, about being called too young to know her own heart, about being dismissed as confused, dependent, grateful but not capable of real love. Yes, she said. I accept. The announcement appeared in the Times the following morning. Society erupted in approval. The diamond had made a brilliant match. Lord Ashford was besotted. The Marquis of Ashford and Miss Shepherd, it was perfect. Bradley read the announcement over breakfast, the newsprint blurring before his eyes. When Ashford called later that morning to formally notify him, Bradley somehow managed to extend his hand, to offer congratulations, to say all the appropriate things while everything inside him turned to ash. You've made me the happiest of men, Your Grace, Ashford said, his joy unfeigned. I shall spend my life ensuring Kate never regrets her choice. I'm certain you will. The words tasted like poison. Kate's demeanor toward Bradley became glacially polite. Where before there had been warmth, seeking, challenge, now there was only perfect, devastating courtesy. She called him Your Grace in company and avoided being alone with him entirely. When their paths crossed in the household, she would curtsy with mechanical precision and find immediate reason to be elsewhere. Bradley watched the engagement ball preparations transform his townhouse with mounting dread. White roses everywhere, champagne being delivered, musicians hired. Kate stood in the ballroom directing arrangements in a gown of pale blue, looking serene and untouchable, and Bradley felt like a man watching his own execution being meticulously planned. Ashford was unfailingly kind to everyone, including Bradley. I hope you'll visit us in Derbyshire often, Your Grace, he said earnestly. Kate speaks of you with such affection. You've been like a father to her. Like a father. The words were knives. Kate herself seemed to waver in private moments. Bradley caught her once, standing alone in the library where they'd had so many conversations, her hand pressed to a bookshelf as though steadying herself. When she noticed him, something raw and wounded flashed across her face before the mask returned. Congratulations are in order, Bradley said stiffly. Yes, thank you, Your Grace. Are you happy? Kate's laugh was bitter. I'm making a sensible choice. Isn't that what you advised? The night of the engagement ball arrived. Kate descended the stairs in a white silk embroidered with silver, looking like a bride de married already. Ashford waited at the bottom, his face alight with adoration. She wore white to her engagement ball, the color of brides and sacrifice. And Bradley stood in the shadows watching her smile at another man, knowing he had only himself to blame. The ballroom blazed with light and laughter, 200 guests celebrating an engagement that felt like a funeral. Bradley stood near the terrace doors, watching Kate dance with Ashford, her smile perfect and utterly hollow. He had drunk too much champagne toasting their happiness. It hadn't helped. When Kate finally slipped away toward the garden, Bradley told himself to let her go. He lasted 3 minutes before following. He found her by the fountain, moonlight silvering her white gown, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and the rawness in her face nearly brought him to his knees. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you. It's your engagement ball." "Don't," her voice broke. "Don't pretend concern now. Kate, your refusal to acknowledge what's between us isn't honor, Bradley. It's cowardice." The words came out fierce, trembling. "You hide behind duty and propriety, but you're just afraid. Afraid to admit you want something you think you can't have. You don't understand what you're asking." Bradley's control shattered completely. "I've loved you for years, years, Kate. Watching you grow from that grieving girl into this extraordinary woman, knowing I had no right to feel anything but a guardian's appropriate concern. I left for Scotland because I couldn't trust myself near you. I came back believing distance would have changed things, only to find myself in agony every moment, especially watching Ashford." His voice cracked. "But it doesn't matter. Society will destroy you if we— I don't care what society thinks." Kate closed the distance between them. "I won't marry William. I'd rather have nothing, be nothing, than spend my life pretending I don't love you." "Kate, you can't." She kissed him. For one perfect, damning moment, Bradley's restraint evaporated. He pulled her closer, his hand tangling in her hair, kissing her with 3 years of suppressed longing. She tasted like champagne and tears and everything he'd denied himself. And Bradley knew he was lost, had always been lost, would always be. "Kate." They broke apart. Lord Ashford stood at the garden entrance, his face stricken with comprehension. The silence stretched unbearable. Then Ashford stepped forward, his expression devastated but somehow still kind. "How long?" he asked quietly. "William?" "I'm so sorry," Kate began. "How long have you loved him?" Kate's chin lifted with heartbreaking courage. "Always." Ashford looked at Bradley, seeing the truth written there, then back at Kate. "I wondered why you seemed so distant. I told myself it was nerves." He removed her ring with shaking hands. "I release you from our engagement. I won't make you marry a man you don't love. William, I loved you enough to want your happiness. Kate, even if it's not with me." He turned and walked back toward the ballroom, leaving them in ruins. In the moonlit garden, with the sounds of celebration distant and false, Kate Shepherd committed social suicide. She kissed her guardian, and the world they knew ended. By dawn, every drawing room in Mayfair knew. The Duke of Davison and his ward, caught in a compromising embrace. The engagement broken, the scandal was exquisite, delicious, devastating. The whispers began immediately, vicious and contradictory. Kate had seduced her guardian, manipulated his affections, used her position to entrap a duke. No, Bradley had groomed her from 16, exploited her dependence, taken advantage of a vulnerable orphan. They were both guilty, both shameless. The sacred trust between guardian and ward destroyed. Bradley faced the judgment of his peers at White's Club 2 days after the ball. Some men, those who knew him well, stood by him. Most did not. Lord Pembroke cut him directly on St. James Street. The Earl of Thornbury called him a disgrace to his title. Invitations to parliamentary dinners were quietly withdrawn. Kate's ostracization was swifter and more absolute. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Invitations that had flooded the household ceased entirely. At the modiste shop, ladies she'd known for years turned their backs. Mrs. Marsh, kind Mrs. Marsh, wept but could not defend her. The diamond of the season had become society's pariah. On the third day, Bradley summoned his solicitor and formally dissolved his guardianship. He signed documents relinquishing all legal authority over Kate's person, property, and future. She was free, legally an independent woman at 22. Then he did something unprecedented. He wrote a public statement to the Times, taking full responsibility and asserting Kate's complete innocence and agency. Miss Shepherd has been the victim of my failure to maintain appropriate boundaries. Any affection between us developed despite the power imbalance, not because of it. She is guilty of nothing save having the misfortune of a guardian who failed in his duty to remain emotionally detached. I ask society to direct its condemnation where it belongs, solely upon me. The statement changed nothing and everything. Kate was still ruined, but Bradley's public acceptance of blame gave her a measure of dignity. The most surprising grace came from Lord Ashford. At his club, when men spoke of Kate with crude speculation, William stood and said clearly, "Miss Shepherd is a woman of impeccable character who found herself in an impossible situation. I'll thank you not to slander her in my presence." The room fell silent. Ashford's words, though they couldn't restore Kate's reputation, gave some men pause. Kate remained in Bradley's household. Where else could she go? But now as a guest, not a ward. They existed in careful separation, the house too full of servants and witnesses for private conversation. Yet Kate held her head impossibly high when she walked through rooms where staff whispered. She had lost everything: reputation, social position, marriageable prospects, security. Society called her a manipulator, a seductress, an ungrateful ward. Bradley they called a predator, a betrayer, a disgrace, and through it all, Kate held her head high because for the first time in her life, she had chosen for herself. Bradley's trunks stood packed in the entrance hall. He was leaving for Scotland at dawn, perhaps permanently. Kate would receive a generous settlement, enough to live independently. It was the honorable thing to do: remove himself from her life, let the scandal fade, give her a chance at some future he couldn't envision. He heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to find Kate descending, still in her dressing gown, her hair loose around her shoulders. "You were leaving without saying goodbye," she said quietly. "I thought it would be easier." "For whom?" Kate crossed the marble floor until she stood before him. "I'm choosing you, Bradley, freely, fully, without obligation or gratitude or dependence. I'm choosing you." "Kate, you don't understand what you're giving up." "I understand perfectly." Her voice was steady, certain. "I'm done being grateful, done being protected, done being the ward you saved. I want to be chosen as your equal, or not at all." Bradley looked at her, this extraordinary woman who had faced society's condemnation with her head high, who knew exactly what loving him would cost and chose it anyway, and finally allowed himself to believe. "I choose you," he said hoarsely, pulling her into his arms. "God help me, I choose you." They married 3 days later in a small chapel outside London, witnessed only by Bradley's sister Catherine and, surprisingly, Lord Ashford, who attended with quiet dignity. The ceremony was simple, honest, theirs. Returning to London as Duke and Duchess of Davison was not triumphant. Some doors remained closed. Certain matrons would never receive them. But Bradley's closest friends stood by them, and gradually a small circle formed, people who valued substance over scandal. A year later, they attended their first major ball as a married couple. Kate wore deep emerald silk, and when they entered, the ballroom didn't fall silent with shock, but with a more complex recognition. The Duke and his Duchess, the scandal that had become a marriage. Across the room, Lord Ashford danced with a young lady, his attention clearly captivated. When his eyes met Kate's, he smiled, genuine, healed, happy for her. Some wounds, it seemed, did mend. Bradley led Kate onto the dance floor, his hand at her waist, and suddenly Kate was transported back to that night at Almack's a year ago. But everything had changed. Then they had been guardian and ward, forbidden and frightened. Now they were husband and wife, partners who had fought for the right to stand here together. "Do you regret it?" Bradley asked softly, reading her expression. Kate looked up at the man she had chosen, who had chosen her in return, and smiled. "I regret nothing." They called it a scandal. Kate called it a choice. And as she danced in her husband's arms, the diamond of the season, who had chosen a love society, condemned, she knew she had never been more free. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comment below. If you love this story of survival, protection, and unexpected love, subscribe to our channel for more dark romance tales. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support helps us create more content like this. Thank you for being part of community.